find many of the answers that we are looking for, that there will be a good exchange of information and us all getting to know one another. We thank you for your Son, Jesus, and the love that you have expressed to us through him. We pray that we will demonstrate our love for you and following you with all of our heart, soul, strength, and mind. Forgive us of our sins, forgive our nation of our sins, and continue to give us chances to turn back to you before it's too late. Thank you for everything. And in Christ's name we pray this evening.
Amen. Amen. We'd like to say the pledge. So we do not have a flag. Does anyone have on his
Dave's got one on his chest. That's good enough.
Yeah. We're going to say the pledge.
We're going to say it. Pledge to Dave.
Okay. Would you like to lead us, Raul?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Everybody comfortable? Yep. Well, thank you for coming out on such short notice. This is amazing. We got a call a couple days ago to just kind of set something up really quick, and so this has been done in 48 hours. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for being interested and involved. I'm going to just briefly tell you a little bit about what I know about Raul Labrador, and then I'm going to just let him take over. And I know very little about Raul Labrador, except every time I get called into the speaker's office and yelled at, he always says, "You're just like Raul Labrador." And I said, that's not such a bad thing. And but I never really knew Raul Labrador, and I don't follow politics that much, and you guys do know that about me. And I know it's scary, but especially not federal stuff. Well, last year, if you remember, there were a lot of attacks coming out again, or 2 years ago, during the election cycle, we had the Democrats saying, you know, our supporters, people with our hats on, were harassing voters and this and that, and you may remember that. And the Attorney General got involved, and many of you might not know that, and tried to investigate. And my husband was working out of town, and things were like looking so bleak. I'm like, oh, this is just a mess. And I got a call out of the blue, and it was this gentleman, and he said, "Hi Heather, this is Raul Labrador." I'm like, wow, you're one of the federal guys. But he said, I think what they're doing to you is wrong. And he said, I don't support that, and it's wrong. And he said, I have some extra campaign money, and I'm going to send you a check. And I said, wow, thank you. He is the only politician, and I use that term lightly because I don't think he's really that much of a politician. Statesperson that reached out to me during a time where I was being completely attacked, and as you know, for 3 years I have been, and sent me a check for $1,000. That's a big. To me, that's a huge statement, and it basically said, I don't care what people think. I don't care that people. I like what you're doing, and I stand with you. And that was huge to me. And that's why he was the first person I've endorsed ever. I've always warned everybody, don't endorse anybody. And then I endorsed Raul, one other person. So, but that's why. And I plan to share that story, you know, on YouTube one of these days. But that's something I haven't shared with many. And so anyway, when he asked me to do this, I said absolutely. And so here we are. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Heather, I first want to introduce you to my wife, Becca. We have been married for 26 years. We have 5 children, 4 boys and 1 girl. And we're going to be grandparents, as I've told many of you at the other events, in a day or two. Our son and his wife are expecting, she's due today, but clearly she hasn't had the baby yet, or I wouldn't be here. And she might be born today, tomorrow, anytime, but we're going to be grandparents here pretty soon. You know, what Heather talked about, and it's funny, I've heard that story. So you're not the only one who's told that you're just like Raul Labrador. I've heard that several times from several people. And I take that as a badge of honor, that people who are standing up for what is right are being compared to me. And I think it is because when I became a legislator, I didn't become a legislator to become somebody. I didn't run for Congress to become somebody. I did these things because I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to make sure that I was first honest with my constituents, that I told them what I believed in. And I remember, you know, I ran for Congress 8 years ago, and I remember I started telling people in town halls like this and in meetings like this, no, I actually disagree with you on this. And my staff would cringe, and they would say, you can't say that. You can't tell people. And I'm like, so do you want me to lie to them? Do you want me to tell them something that I don't agree with, or make them think that I believe the same things that they believe? Or I would say things that I thought for sure. I was in a room full of people where I thought everyone in that room is going to disagree with me. But I want them to know what I stand for, and I want them to know what I'm going to do when I get elected. Because if they follow what I was doing, they're going to see that I'm going to do exactly what I said I was going to do. So a couple of weeks ago, one of my friends, Pastor Tim from Coeur d'Alene, he and I were talking, and I knew he was supporting me privately, but I asked him if he would support me publicly. And he said, you know, I would love to support you publicly. And I said, but I want to tell you why I want to support you and why I've always supported you. He said, 8 years ago, you came to my church and you spoke to a group of pastors. And we all sat down and we asked you a bunch of questions. And he said, I was the scribe. I was the one who was taking all the notes. I wrote down every question and every answer that you gave. And he said, you did everything you said you were going to do. You kept every promise that you made in that day. And you did, and you stood by your word. And I never have to question whether you're going to do what you say you're going to do. So I would love to support you publicly. So if there's anything you can know about me, I mean, I'm a constitutional conservative, like I believe most of you are. I believe in the Constitution. I believe in liberty. I believe you can look at my record and you will see that very few people have the strong record that I have. But it's easy to have a good record, but also not be a man of your word. Or it's easy to stand up here and say a lot of beautiful things and not follow through on them. But the one thing I want you to remember about me is that I will do exactly what I say I'm going to do. I will be honest with you, I will be straightforward, and I will have no problem fighting, not just the other side, the Democrats, but fighting the establishment in my own party. And I have stood up to them for 12 years. And it's one of the reasons why they don't support me, and it's one of the reasons why they are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars attacking me. The funny thing is that the same thing happened 8 years ago. 8 years ago, I had about $2.5 million spent against me. I never have as much money as my opponents. And why is that? Why don't we usually have as much money as our opponents?
Because the conservatives support you.
Because conservatives support you. When you do the right thing and you don't make empty promises, you don't get as much in cash donations. Because usually the people that are giving you cash are people who believe in you, not people who want something from you. But if you're willing to go around making empty promises to people, you're going to get a lot of cash. Because you're telling them, I'm going to do this for you. You're like Oprah, right? There's a free car for you, and a free car for you, and a free car for you. So if you're willing to do that, you're going to get a lot of donations. And there's people in this race that will continuously, they say one thing to one group, they say another thing to another group, and they're making empty promises to the people of this state. I will never do that. You will know what I believe, you will know what I stand for, and you will know when we disagree, because we will have a nice, honest discussion about those things. So thank you very much for being here, and I would love to stand for any questions. And Heather, thank you for putting this meeting together.
Hey, Ral, I want to thank you. My brother was diagnosed with esophageal cancer a couple years ago, a veteran of the Air Force, and he could not get any help from anybody until my sister-in-law called you. Her name is Art Vallis. So I want to thank you for doing that. Because
Thank you.
Yes.
So when Ronald Reagan gave his inaugural speech, he said, and everybody remembers this, government is not the solution to our problems, government is the problem, right? And we all remember that. What people don't remember that in that speech and in future speeches He also said that we had a responsibility to make sure that the things government was doing, that they were doing them right. And I see that as my job. I'm not just a guy who's going to Congress to fight against things, which I do all the time, but for my constituents, I want to make sure that they receive the benefits that they have earned, like veterans. And if the Veteran Administration is not working on a case, we make sure that they do. But what we do is we do it a little differently than the other offices. And the reason I'm telling you this story, I'm so grateful that you share that, is because I want to do the same thing as the governor. When I started working as a congressman, I would tell my staff that when they call an agency of the federal government and they get no for an answer, the question they should always ask is, why not? Why can't this happen? Because like you said, it was your brother-in-law?
My brother.
Your brother, he was getting no, right? He was getting the runaround and the runaround. And the problem with government is they really love to say no to everybody and not help people. I think it's our responsibility to be public servants, to actually provide the service that people are supposed to receive. So my staff, if they get from the VA a letter or a call saying no, they always ask the follow-up question, why not? And what's amazing, that simple question, they forces them to think about, well, I don't know why not. And they actually look at the regulations, they look at the statutes, and we end up getting better results than any other office. In fact, we get letters all the time saying, we went to all the other congressional offices and they said no, and we went to your office and in 1 week, you fixed our problem. In fact, I got a great letter this week. This guy, just a typical letter, thank you, I was having problems with the VA, thank you for the work that you do. The only way I can repay you is I'm gonna vote for you for governor, right? So, which was a nice letter, and then he finishes. And you need to know that that means I'm not voting for my cousin, Brad Little. That was the greatest letter. Yes.
So I have a question regarding militias and 3%ers. In times of crisis, like what's going on right now with the borders and stuff, and President Trump having problems getting some states to agree to National Guard, where would you stand on that position?
Well, I think the National Guard, if President Trump asks, and what he has done, if you have read the articles, he's still out. There are two statutes. One, the National Guard can stay under the auspices of the state with the governor in charge, and he can also call the National Guard, and then he becomes the head of the National Guard. He has not done that. He has decided that he's going to let the governors continue to be the chief executive and be in charge of the National Guard. If he called on Idaho to do that, I would definitely send the National Guard down there and help.
Okay.
As you probably know, Bonner and Boundary County, we sit on the last and probably the largest untapped body of water in Lake Monterey and Rathlin Aquifer, and we are also the last part of the state to be adjudicated. As Governor, my question is to you, how will you develop a strategy to protect that water so it's Idaho water for Idahoans first? That's my first part of the question. Second part, we have this pending sale of Avista to Hydro One, a Canadian company. We also have the Columbia Treaty that's up in arms, and a lot of people up here are really concerned about what's going to happen to Idaho.
I'm concerned about the treaty as well. I'm concerned about the sale, and I want to make sure that Idaho remains sovereign over our lands and our water. And I want to make sure that we follow the law. The law is first in time, first in right. We need to make sure that you receive the rights to that water, that we're not doing anything to lose, you know, the spillage and all those things, that we're not overflowing and sending it somewhere else. So I want to make sure that we've had some good adjudications down south, and we want to make sure that we follow the pattern that we have had over the last little while, but we also need to stand up to the federal government and make sure that they don't do anything to try to overtake the sovereignty that we have over our water. We need to stand up for that. So I will work with you. You guys have worked on this issue a lot more than I have. So I also want to sit down with you. That's one thing that I want you to know about me. I don't have the answers to every question. and I'm willing to stand up and sit down with people that have been working on the issue. I will get the best minds around the table, and we will craft a solution that will be good for Idaho and put Idaho first.
Thank you.
So. Yes, sir.
I've got a question on federal land holdings in the West. A lot of people read the Constitution and don't see authority for the federal government to hold these lands. And up until now, there hasn't been any effort that we've noticed at all from the governor of Idaho to even try and bring these lands into more or greater control by the state. So as if you were to be elected governor, how would you move forward? What would you do on that issue?
So I believe we should manage the lands that are in our state under state management practices. So I'm not talking about transferring the title, but transferring the management right now. If you look at what's happening nationally, the United States is not ready for complete transfer of lands, and I'm not sure that Idaho is ready for that. But we know how to manage our lands better than the federal government. So I have a bill actually in Congress right now that would have transferred the management of our federal lands to the state. And when you do it under state management practices, several things happen. You have multiple use, you have access to the natural resources, and you're able to do certain things that you can't do in federal lands. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I learned that was the most ridiculous thing, and I guess you guys might know this, but when I first came to Congress, I had a group of loggers, and interestingly, it was the loggers and some of the federal agency employees who were frustrated with it. They said that every time that we have a fire, the law says that they can salvage the timber as long as the flames are still going. As soon as the fire dies, they have to go through the NEPA process. So you understand, NEPA means that you have to wait, you have to do a bunch of steps before you can actually salvage the timber. Well, guess what happens to most of that timber?
Ashes.
Yeah, it's ashes, or it's just sitting there too long, so you can't really salvage it. Under state lands, we can actually go in and make sure that right after the fire, we can take some of that salvage and take it out and use it for different uses. So my bill would actually change the law so we would allow under state management practices to access our lands and to do multiple use and to do salvaging and things like that. And then it would divide the revenues between the state government and the federal, actually not even the state government, the local community. So it would go to the county coffers. So you would have, and I can't remember, is it 75-25? Yep. Yeah, 75 for the county, 25% for the state. Because what your county commissioners are doing, every year they come to Washington, D.C., and they beg for more money. And it's not because they want to beg for more money, it's because they're saying in some of these counties, I have 90% of my county is under federal control, or 60%, or 70%, and they're not receiving enough revenue. So they're being forced right now to come to the federal government and beg for money, and I don't want them to do that anymore. I want them to be able to use their lands, to be able to use the natural resources, and be able to pay for their own destiny.
Excellent.
So a follow-up
question on that, if I might, just to clarify your statement a little bit. Your ultimate goal and what you see as being the right option is to eventually have states have title of these lands?
I'm not there. I believe right now we need to show the American people, because remember, this is convincing Congress. We need to show the American people that we can manage these lands before we even have the discussion about, now I believe that we can. So we just need to show it.
I think the statistic bears that out too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You look at the state. Yeah, you look at the state lands versus the federal lands. They're healthier. They're more vibrant. There's so many better things. You know, the nutrients are better. Everything. I think you're right. The statistics bear it out. But we need to do the first step. We need to make sure that we do the right thing first before we even have a discussion about the other things. Which you're never going to get to that. Because that's just not really where the American mindset, not even the people of Idaho are for that.
So Raul, in that plan, what happens to agencies like the Forest Service, the BLMs? How are they what happens to them if the state takes over?
So if we take, so right now it's a pilot project, so it would just be over a small percentage of our lands. And there, it would be under the auspices of the state, of our state land board and our state land agencies. The only difference is that the fires would still be controlled, would still be taken down by BLM and the federal agency, because it's the whole forest that they have to be in charge of. But with our practices, we can actually prevent some of those forest fires and make it cheaper. One of the arguments against my bill is that, then who's gonna pay for the fires? But I say we're actually gonna be able to control fires better than we do right now. And it's gonna be cheaper. Our fire practices and our management of our fire is gonna be much, much cheaper.
So are we still utilizing federal employees that are under the direction of
Not
states?
not on those lands.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Rob, what about the lockouts we've been having and gates have been showing up? We can't access private property.
You're talking about private property
Well,
or
we're talking
public?
about the feds putting a gate up. A good example would be East Hayden Lake Road. It goes through U.S. Forest Service property to get to their ranches, and they're locking the gates out.
Yeah, we actually just started, we saw a picture just this week, and I was gonna talk to my staff, because we're starting to see more and more of those lockouts, and I need to look into that a little, because I'm not sure exactly what's happening and why they're being allowed to do that. Because the whole point, the whole argument that we hear from the environmentalists is that the states can't manage the land because they want access for everybody. But now we're seeing all these lockouts on our federal land, so it's exactly under what auspices are they
But it
doing that?
isn't federal land, it's our land, right?
Oh, it's on our. Yes.
Kind of going back to his question, I worked for the Forest Service in the early '70s in Montana, actually Lolo National Forest, Thompson Falls Ranger District, 70, then 74 and 75. Those years, there were no gates on federal Forest Service property. The forest was pretty much open.
Yeah.
There just weren't any. And then I moved to Alaska and lived in Alaska for almost 40 years. My wife and I moved down to Idaho in 2012, and I was appalled at what I found when I got here.
Have you done any research on this?
Well, I've talked to the Forest Service about this. So much of our, and I consider this our land. They work for us.
They do, definitely.
They do,
yes.
but they seem intent on locking the public out of the majority of their land, and as time has gone by, more and more areas are being gated.
That's right.
Lack of access, and I don't know what you could do as governor with the feds to help in that regard, but it would sure be nice to see some of these gates open, and I understand locking up a little bit of it, for say if there's some good reason for it, but there's so much of it locked up that there really isn't any good reason.
Does anybody know, why they're locking them up? Are they giving a reason?
Their excuse is that they don't have the money to maintain the road. And since they can't maintain the road, they want to lock it up so it doesn't get hurt more.
Yeah, that's my argument that's why I want us to manage it, because then if we can manage it, we can have more access to those roads. So that's the explanation, is that they don't have the money for.
And then they'll go through and they'll destroy roads too.
What is it?
The grizzly and the lynx, they'll use species to keep us off the land.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is just an excuse.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, yes.
I don't really have a question, I have a comment, but I want to thank you for stepping up and supporting our Idahoans that were down in prison down in Nevada.
Well, I had a lot of my friends in the legislature who were calling me, and they wanted us to do something about it. And one of the things, they were frustrated, and they'll tell you, they were frustrated at me for a little bit, because I was saying, I need to understand all the issues, and that's one thing that you'll know about me, is that I don't just jump into an issue just head first. I need to study the issue. I need to figure out all the sides are, maybe it's the lawyer in me, you know, that I want to make sure that I.
Don't go for just what's popular?
Yes. and even when my friends are calling me, I wanted to understand all the issues. But at the end of the second trial, I had been a criminal defense lawyer. I had never heard of anybody being tried 3 times for the same crime. That's just unheard of. You always hear of one trial and then a retrial. And at that time, as you know, the state legislators had already signed a letter that had gone to the Attorney General. And I have a good relationship with the Attorney General, so I just knew that was the perfect time for me to reach out. I reached out to the Attorney General, and I reached out to other people in the Justice Department, and I think it was just the right timing. And I think that's something in politics that is important. You know, when you're choosing a judge, when you're choosing a governor, you need to have somebody with good judgment. You know, it's somebody who is not just going to do the right things, but is going to do the right things at the right time when it's most auspicious to do that. You know, and I think it was just the right time. As I studied the issue, when I was able to reach out, I think that was the right time, and I think things worked out because of the way that I approached it. So I think it's important, and I appreciate the state legislators who worked on this, because they were the ones who got the ball rolling, and I just wanted to be helpful in their efforts. So thank you.
Mr.
Yes.
Labrador, could you tell us what your thoughts are regarding NAFTA?
Interesting.
I was about to ask that, actually.
So I'll tell you a funny story. I had the Mexican ambassador to the United States come talk to actually the Freedom Caucus, so the big group that you know, that I created. You guys have heard of the Freedom Caucus, right?
Yes.
I think you may have a Freedom Caucus in the House here now. So I was one of the original founders of the Freedom Caucus in Congress. And so he came to speak to us, and he started complaining about the NAFTA renegotiations, but not in a bad way. He was just saying, you know, this is bad. We need to make sure that we have good trade and all these things. And then finally he said, however, the reality is that there are some problems with NAFTA, and I think we need to do something to make sure that the United States is having a better deal. And it's one of the things that I really like about Trump. The typical Republican would just say, oh, you know, NAFTA is untouchable, we can't do anything about it, so we just need to leave it alone. And then other countries are taking advantage of us. This guy spent like 75% of his time talking about how, you know, we got to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't screw this up, all these different things. And then in the end he said, but in the end, I think we are going to have to change it so there's more benefits to the United States. So his negotiating style, I think because it's so atypical of a politician, you know, most politicians are worried about what the media is going to say about them. He doesn't care. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. He doesn't care what the media says about him. And he's able to negotiate. Now, my personal opinion is I don't like multilateral agreements. I like bilateral agreements. I believe that our trade, every one of our pacts and trade agreements should be with only one nation at a time. It shouldn't be with multiple nations, because what ends up happening is that every nation gets gets a bunch of things that they want, and the United States in the end gets the weaker end of a deal when you have a multilateral agreement. If you have bilateral agreements, I think then the United States can use the strength that we have to make sure that we get the best possible outcome for the United States.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
If you were to become governor, is there anything you would repeal that previous administrations have done?
Yes.
Thank you, Linda.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through all the regulations in every single department. We're going to try to figure out what regulations are not necessary. And you'll be surprised about this. One governor who did this was actually Cecil Andrews. He got rid of a bunch of regulations when he began. I'm not praising him for being a good governor. I'm just saying this was something that, so this is not just Republicans, a Democrat actually did that. You can go through the regulatory environment that we have. We have too many regulations at the state level, and we can go one by one and determine which ones we just don't need anymore, which ones are unnecessary, which ones, sometimes you have regulations that don't even comply with the statute that they're based on. So we're gonna do that. So that's the first thing. The second thing, there's several laws, and one of the laws that really concerns me the most is a tax law that we have in the state of Idaho right now, where we're giving benefits to specific companies to come to the state. I think that's wrong. And I'll give you one example. In southwestern Idaho, in Boise, there's an existing company that has been in Idaho for 30 years that does payroll. That company has been paying taxes and employing a lot of people for the last 30 years. We, as a state, just gave millions of dollars to a new company that was a competitor of theirs to come into the state. And I just think, guess who's paying for those millions of dollars? That existing company that is paying taxes is paying for their competitor to come into the state. The worst part is that because they have lower taxes now, they're going into the existing company and poaching their employees because they can pay higher wages than the existing company. And there's a third problem with that. Now, new companies bringing new families, new people to Idaho. What does that create? That creates further infrastructure needs, right? Well, if they're not paying their fair share of taxes, who's paying for their growing economy and the growing infrastructure needs? Again, it's the existing company. So the existing company is getting hit twice. First, they're paying for the tax break, and then they're paying for the growth that that company created. That's one of the laws that I want to repeat.
Real quick, before you go on, who owns a yellow Toyota? Anybody in here? Headlights are on.
Oh, thank you. And then,
Thank you very much.
We have a bunch of people standing around, so if you want to sit down, there's a couple of chairs
Thank
here,
you very
there's
much.
one here, there's a couple here, there's one here.
Yeah.
And so if we need everybody to move back.
Sit, everybody.
Heather thought we might have 30, we're at 62.
Wow. Well, and this is a great picture in front of their refrigerator, right? Everybody wants a picture of their congressman in front of their refrigerator.
Or next governor.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It's up to you. Can I say something about that? It's up to you guys to make sure that that happens. If you like the things that you're hearing and the things that I've done as your congressman and in the state legislature, we need to make sure that we call everybody. You need to call your friends. You need to make sure that they're spending $3-4 million attacking me. They're all full of lies, and you guys need to let your friends know exactly what
I don't like
the
this
truth
negative
is.
attacks. It turns me off.
That's right.
I mean, it absolutely infuriates me.
But they work.
Yes,
People
they do, but
believe.
you got our vote.
Yeah, if you say a lie enough times, people will start to believe.
Right.
What works is they're not here and you are. They made a commitment to be here, right?
Absolutely.
I've got really
Well,
good
as our
friends.
governor,
Yeah, let's let somebody else.
Okay.
There's a bunch of people, so sorry.
The silicone plant thingy that's supposed to be over by Washington.
Are you talking about the smelter?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So what is your opinion, thoughts, stand, whatever you wanna call it on such?
Well, Idaho needs to have a voice. So we can't allow them to go through a process that expedites it without Idaho having a voice. They're talking about going through what I believe is the SEPA process, and we can go through a process like NEPA or something else that actually allows Idaho to make a decision about it. And we need to make sure that the governor takes a position on that and stands up strongly against them making a decision without us being heard in this process. Yes.
Congressman Labrador, would it be possible that we could have some of your signs in Boundary County?
Yes.
And might it be possible that you could counter they're negative ads on the radio. And I mean, people that know me and know what I stand for and know, who I would vote for, are coming up to me and saying, is that really true? He did this? He's for gay marriage? He's that? And I don't want.
There's an emphasis that I'm for gay marriage?
Oh, because it's by innuendo on one of the commercials.
What is that one? I haven't heard that one.
There's a whole bunch. She knows them. She's just
Yes,
breaks me
it's, you were lumped in with.
Oh, it's because, so they're putting that together.
So Tommy puts you together.
No,
And when people are casual listeners, it sounds like, oh yeah, he's.
I understand that. I was like, wow, I hadn't heard that attack. I've heard a lot of lies. I hadn't heard that one. But so here the first thing we did on was it Thursday? Yes, on third, I finally had enough. I don't like responding to my opponents. But like I said earlier, people start believing it if they hear it all the time. So we had a press conference in Boise, and that's being disseminated right now, where we started talking about the lies that Tommy Alquist is saying about my campaign. And the most egregious lie, I mean, there's some innuendo, like for example, they keep talking about me driving a luxury vehicle.
And going to Spain every week.
And going to Spain all the time. So the luxury vehicle was a Ford Explorer that my congressional office had so we could get around the state. You guys all believe that a Ford Explorer is a luxury vehicle, right? But that's an innuendo, that's an exaggeration. The trip, for example, was right after Benghazi. No, but I'm explaining. Right after Benghazi, a group of congressmen and congresswomen went to North Africa and the Middle East to inspect the embassies to make sure that we had security plans in all of those areas. I was doing my job. But that's just innuendo. But there was one outright lie that they started, and they've been repeating again and again, that I have never passed any legislation while I've been in Congress.
Right.
But I've been ineffective because I never passed legislation.
Because you were absent.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. You know, I was there 95.3% of the time,
Yeah.
all right? But, so we did a press conference explaining how this was a lie, and I had 4 people who were behind me who had been directly affected by the bills that I had passed in Congress. And we called them out and we asked for those lies to be taken down. This is what tells you about his character, is that not only is he not taking it down, but they responded. It took them 24 hours to respond. And he responded by saying, or his PAC responded by saying, well, what we really meant is that none of those bills ever passed as standalone legislation. They passed together. And they're just they're going into a tailspin right now, because what they're doing is they're lying. And as you know, if people are willing to lie about small things, they're willing to lie about big things. And the worst part is, if you're willing to lie to get this job, imagine what a person will do once they have the job. So he should be nowhere near the governor's office, and we're going to make sure that And the second thing is signs. Yes, we'll get you the name of the person who is in charge of signs. And I thought, we have signs up here already, didn't we?
No,
No, but we started
in Bonner.
Yeah, we have them.
And Cornell in
Sandpoint.
Sandpoint has a bunch of signs. We brought 3 today, but we have lots of signs.
So we have signs so we can start getting them. And the other thing is that we are going to do an ad where we're specifically going to talk about just defending my character, making sure that people understand who I am, what I stand for, and about all these lies. And I think you're going to see those ads are going to start. You're going to see that ad in the next week or so, and we're going to start talking about those things.
Right, and I bring this up now only because absentee ballots were sent out here on March 30th.
Correct.
So
No, I understand. We know.
Raul, on your advertising, Blue Sky Broadcasting does the 2 counties up here, and they notoriously want to charge politicians a lot of money for the ads, and it's against the FCC rules.
Okay.
So a business only gets charged $10 an ad. You'll call them as a politician, they want to charge you $18 an ad. So
Okay.
call them on it. Because
Okay,
we
perfect.
did, and they backed down.
So Blue Sky. Okay, thank you. All right. Hold on. Anybody who hasn't asked a question? Yes.
We've, over the last 6-8 months, there's been a lot of talk about the refugee movement, especially in Sandpoint. We have a government there that is kind of part and parcel with bringing these people in at the expense of the community. Is there anything that immediately comes to your mind as far as allowing community members to be the ones that have a decision about who and what and when?
So right now, there's nothing that can be done, but I have a bill in Congress that changes refugee law and many, does reforms of the refugee laws in many different ways. But one of the ways that it changes refugee law is by saying that the local communities have a say in whether refugees come to the to their local community. So either the governor or the local the local communities can make those determinations. We passed that out of the Judiciary Committee. I don't know if you guys know, but I'm the Immigration Subcommittee Chairman in the House of Representatives. And we passed it out of committee, and it hasn't gone to the floor yet. We're having some problems because, as you know, not every Republican in Washington is conservative. And so we're not having problems with the left. We're actually having problems with our own party not standing up for the right thing on some of these immigration issues. So, but we have an idea. Without that law, it's going to be very difficult for a local community to really decide who can live in that community. So what we want to do is make sure that the local community can determine, make a decision. So what it says is that in the decision-making process, they have to ask the community what their wishes are, and they have to abide by those wishes.
Because they have to furnish the infrastructure.
Correct.
A follow-up, Raul, on that. Most of the agencies that are bringing these people in are relying on federal money for that. So if we cut that money off, the way I see it, my dad said always follow the money.
Always follow the money, yes.
So if we can cut a large part of that money off, the problem pretty much goes away.
Well, and we're looking at that, you know, our bill changes a lot of the different things, but the money is very important because they're receiving, they want the refugee population to come in because they receive a lot of money from the federal government. You're absolutely right. All right. Who hasn't asked any questions? Who wants to ask a question? Oh, yes.
Are you willing to look at some of these agencies and the directors of them, and are you willing as a new governor to maybe remove some of them that you think we need new direction in those agencies?
Yes, and I'm going to ask every agency head and every department head that is appointed by the governor to step down and to reapply for their So to make sure that the people that are representing the governor in those agencies, that they're actually representing the people, that it's not about having just a job in the state government, it's actually about doing their job correctly. Remember what I said earlier, that I teach my staff to not just accept the first no for an answer. I want our agencies to know that they shouldn't always be giving no for an answer. They should be actually answering the questions that the public is asking, making sure that the public is being treated. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes the answer is no, but that no answer should only come after the state employee has actually looked through all the options that are available. And they should be public servants. They should be working with the public. So yes, we will make sure that every department and every administrator that is appointed by the governor, that there's somebody who complies with the vision that I have for the state and for public service.
Where do you stand on the refugee program?
I am for a refugee program, but I think that local communities need to make a determination whether they want to accept. I'm for immigration. I believe immigration is good for the United States. I don't believe in illegal immigration, and I don't believe that refugees should be forced upon communities. But I think the law is pretty clear on who should be a refugee and who shouldn't be a refugee, and we also need to change our asylum laws. And that's the other thing. I have a bill, remember, refugees and asylums are two different laws. I also have a bill on asylum where we would make sure that right now what's happening in the United States, you need to understand with the asylum laws, is that people are rushing to the border, and then at the border they claim that they have an asylum claim, and they claim that they have a fear of persecution in their home country. The moment they make that claim, everything stops and they get to stay in the United States for a long period of time. And the hearings are sometimes taking years and years and years. What I want to do and what my law does is it ends that asylum game, in essence, and they make a determination immediately as soon as they catch them, so they can determine if there's really a credible fear, if there's really a reason why a hearing should be held, and if no hearing should be held, that they be kicked immediately out of the United States. So I want to reform both of those programs, but I actually believe in the immigration system of the United States. And I think it's good to allow immigrants to come to the United States. We just want to decide, we the United States should decide who should come to the United States. It shouldn't be the family members that decide who comes to the United States.
Or the lottery.
I want to, so my bill, so I have 3 or 4 different bills. In fact, the bill that I have on immigration, my biggest bill on immigration, is the bill that has been, that President Trump has said he wants to pass in Congress. It's called the Goodlatte Labrador bill. And Bob Goodlatte is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and I'm the chairman of the Judiciary Subcommittee under immigration. And that bill deals with sanctuary cities, it deals with chain migration, and it deals with the visa lottery. It ends the visa lottery, it ends chain migration, and only allows the family members that to come to the United States are children and spouses, instead of all the different people that we can bring right now. And then it changes it to a merit-based system that we can, the people that are coming to the United States from then on will be people that we need in the United States, not just family members of people that are here.
I do have a follow-up question real quick. So with that being
said, that's 2 questions, and other people need to ask. Yes.
No, we have this cute congresswoman here. I've forgotten her name. But she says that sometimes the bills that are subjected or entered actually are under total control of the chairman of the committee, and they decide what they want to hear and they don't want to hear. Is that the way it should be? Or?
No, it shouldn't be. And Heather and I have talked a lot about this. Sage and I have talked a lot about this. And you guys have 2 great legislators here. Yeah. I believe, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience. When I was a legislator in the State House, that was 12 years ago, I was really lucky that I had a good Speaker of the House. My Speaker of the House, it was actually Lawrence Denny, and you guys know him. He's now your Secretary of State. Lawrence Denny, when I went in, he sat me in a room and he told me, what are your ideas for legislation? And he even gave me a couple of ideas that he had on legislation, and he just handed them to me. And I thought, well, that's weird. I've just started this. How do I get through this process? What he was trying to do is teach me how to be a legislator. And he allowed me to carry this legislation. He allowed me to go through the process. And what I learned is that passing legislation is not easy. It's difficult. You have to do a lot of work. You have to do a lot of relationship building, a lot of different things. But what I didn't realize at the time is that he was trying to keep me busy, so I wouldn't be causing trouble in other areas. What he wanted to do is to make sure that he felt I was being treated with respect during that entire time that I was a state legislator. In fact, he and I developed such a good relationship that when I ran for Congress and nobody believed that I could win, he was my campaign chairman. He decided that he would support me because he knew that I would be a good member of Congress and that I was a conservative who would stand up for conservative things. I went to Washington, D.C., being so excited about having been a legislator, and I realized that the way it works over there is totally the opposite. The chairman decides what legislation is going to pass out of the committee, but the chairman's being told by the Speaker of the House what legislation is going to pass out of the committee. And that's always determined not necessarily by the best legislation, but by the people who give the most money to the party, by the people who kiss up to leadership the most, by the people who are willing to, what I call is people that are willing to hand over their voting cards. I'll show you. Let me see if I have it right here. Every member of Congress has this. This is my ID and my voting card. When I vote, I stick this in and I vote yes or no or present. I'm not willing to hand this over to anybody. There are members of Congress who are, that they wait for leadership to tell them how they're going to vote on different pieces of legislation. The more you're willing to do that, the more that your bills are going to be heard on the floor, the more that things are going to go your way, the more you're going to be invited to all the parties. Totally different environment than what I experienced in the legislature. When I started hearing from some of my friends, is that it was turning that way here, into that way here in Idaho. I've had several conversations with people who I consider my friends as well in the leadership of the House, and I have told them that if you want to make sure that you can have legislators that are working and busy all the time, instead of legislators that are creating problems for you, let them work. If their ideas are bad, they're gonna die. They're just gonna go to they're not gonna pass the committee, they're not gonna pass the House, or they might pass the House and not pass the Senate. That is a way where Heather can learn and Sage can learn as a legislator. I'm not telling you that every idea Heather has is a good idea, but she should have a right to have those ideas heard, right? I know she disagrees with that, but she should have a right to make sure that those ideas are heard. And she'll learn, because you also learn, you know, people always tell legislators that they need to be moderate, especially the media. You need to be a moderate. There should be no moderate legislators. The process, however, is a moderating process. I have crazy right-wing ideas. Not everyone in the legislature will have the same ideas that I do. If you work together as a legislative body, the process will moderate the idea, and the product that comes out will be reflective of the people of Idaho as a whole. If you don't allow that to happen, then it's only reflective of special interest groups. It's the people that paid enough money to the speaker, to the governor, to the legislators to get their ideas heard. If we actually let the legislative process work, then good ideas will bubble up and they will continue to rise, and the people of Idaho will be well represented. I don't want Idaho to turn into Washington, D.C. It doesn't work. The reason we have a 13% approval rating in Washington, D.C. is because you have leadership making sure you're putting their thumbs down on everything, and that should never happen in Idaho. And I will work with the legislators to make sure that that happens. But also remember, the governor is not the boss of the legislature. They're two separate branches of government. Yeah. They're in charge of their own branch. And they will come to me with their ideas, and I will come to them with my ideas, and hopefully I can convince them that my ideas are great. Hopefully they can convince me that their ideas are great. I may one day have a bill from Sage and from Heather that I will have to veto. But I'm not going to do it like this current governor does in a hissy fit. I'm just going to call them and say, hey, I disagree with you guys, and I'm going to veto your bill. You know, good luck overriding the veto. And if you do, the people spoke, right? Because that's what the legislative process is. You pass something, I veto it, and they override it. Was the Constitution followed? Absolutely. That's the way it should be. And I think that's the kind of respect that we should have for each other in both branches. Yes, sir.
So I'm just curious about your experience with the situations like the whistleblower protection in government. You must know, or in your lifelong experience in government, you know fraud.
So can I correct you real quick?
I'm sorry.
Not lifelong.
Well, whatever.
12 years.
Your experience
I know I look like I'm 24, but
I would think 12 years like a lifetime almost in government. But
okay.
I'm just curious about what your experience has been with that. If somebody. Have you seen it? Have you reported it? Have you seen other people? And how
we have worked in Congress with a lot of whistleblowers. You know, there's some pretty strict laws in Congress about whistleblowers. I served for 2 years in the Oversight Committee. The job of the Oversight Committee is what it says is to oversee the different federal agencies. And we dealt with whistleblowers there all the time, and I think we should make sure that we have better, stricter laws. One of my proposals as governor is that we have a reporting hotline that people can call to and they can get their answers. And we're gonna have within the governor's office, somebody that will respond to these questions to make sure that they feel free that they can call without repercussions and ramifications. That they're gonna call and we're gonna take care of those things. Because like I told you earlier, my job is to make sure that the agencies are doing their job. And if somebody within their agency is not doing their job, I want to make sure that we find out so we can take care of it. So we want to have something similar to that and in the governor's office. Yes.
How do you feel about the grocery tax in Idaho? If
It
makes it to the governor's office again.
It will be signed by this governor. I will sign the repeal of the grocery tax. Yes.
To follow up on that, I have two questions and a comment. So the first, what is your stance if you're becoming governor on repealing property tax?
Okay.
The second, the big pink elephant in the room, our economy is tanking. Do we have a contingency plan?
Right.
Governments, military, corporations all have contingency plans, a plan B. If the dollar was to do something disastrous, what do we have in place to secure our state?
So you're talking about catastrophic. You're not talking just about what happened.
A lot of people up here lost money in 2008. We haven't fully recovered from 2008.
So what I want to do, my tax plan, I call it the 555 plan. If you look at Idaho, it's the most Republican legislature of any of our neighbors, and yet we have the highest taxes of any of our neighbors. So the first thing I want to do is reduce our taxes to 5% corporate, 5% individual, 5% sales tax. Right now we're at 7.4. You guys just put it down to 6.9, right? A tiny bit. I want to go all the way to 5%. I wish we could go even lower, but we have to do this. I want to do something radical that brings us from the 6.9 now to a 5%. What that will do is we also will get rid of the loopholes in the tax code. And one of the ones that we were talking about earlier is these specific loopholes that we have to bring companies to Idaho. I want to get rid of those loopholes so every individual in Idaho is being treated the same. I hate government picking winners and losers. You know, when government picks winners and losers, I don't know anything about what the best industry is in this area. You guys know what the best industry should be in this area. The market should decide. But what I want to make sure is that you have the tax structure to make sure that you can grow your own business. I want to deal with regulations, which I talked about earlier. If we reduce regulations, we reduce taxes, you will see economic growth that we haven't seen in a long time in Idaho. Because we keep hearing from the governor and the lieutenant governor that this is the fastest growing state in the nation. And that's true. But the jobs that are coming to Idaho are not the high paying jobs that we need. We have a lot of entry level. We have the most per capita minimum wage jobs of most of the states. I think we're like at 47th or 48th. We have some of the lowest wages. We have some of the lowest. Actually, this was funny. Betsy Russell from the Spokesman Review attacked me because she said we don't need to lower taxes in Idaho because we already receive very little revenues. And I was like, no, you're actually getting it backwards. We receive very little revenues because we don't have a business environment that is giving us high wages. If we have higher wages, you receive more revenues because a growing, robust economy gives you more revenues. So we have to make sure that we have that. Then when you have that economic plan, then you're not picking winners and losers, and it gives you the opportunity to have plans for the future. When I was first a state legislator, we had $400 million in our surplus. And you guys are actually building that up again. And do you know where are you right now?
I don't know specifically.
But you've rebuilt it. It's not quite there, but you've rebuilt it quite a bit. We were able to withstand the economic turndown, at least as a government, because we had enough money to, first we cut a bunch of expenses, but then we also had $400 million that we were able to use over 2 or 3 years to kind of keep the budget tight. Now on property taxes, we need to make sure that we keep property taxes low. I don't know that I would eliminate property taxes because your county governments are using some of those revenues to run your government. But what I want to do is I want to get rid of some of the urban renewal abuses that we have right now. Because what's happening is that when you use urban renewal laws and some areas are not being taxed, you're the one who's paying for that. Because if your area is being taxed and the urban renewal area is not being taxed, then they're using your revenues so they can pay for those areas. And the problem with that is that you're not receiving, these people are receiving bigger benefits than you. We can keep property taxes low if we reform our urban renewal laws and we make sure that they're not being abused. Right now they're being abused. They're being extended, they're being gerrymandered, and they're being used in a way that they shouldn't be used in the state of Idaho.
Raul, on a follow-up that, right now, Idaho tries to attract business from out of state. They do that by offering tax credits.
Which is what I talked about
Right.
earlier.
So, would you support that if an existing business that does similar to the same thing that's already here in Idaho, get that same tax credit? Because otherwise you're increasing the opportunity for the business that's already here to.
No, what I support is getting rid of those tax credits.
Okay, so.
And lowering the taxes for everybody.
Be on the same plane.
Yeah, everybody be on the same playing field, because what ends up happening here in Idaho, what they tell you is, you can't get the tax credit because the law says that you have to have 10 new jobs, you have to be bringing in 20 jobs. Well, if you have a company that's already been here for 30 years, they're not going to be able to add 10 new jobs just overnight. A new company can bring 10 new jobs easily. So I just want to lower everybody's taxes. So the existing company and the new company are both going to pay the same rate. And they're going to pay a lower rate. Instead of the 7.4 at 6.9, it's going to go down to 5%. So everyone feels like they're being treated equally. Yeah.
My concern is the way the schools are going with, we're teaching all of our children, or that the schools are teaching all of our children to be the victims all the time, and they've taken the morals completely out of any kind of teaching situation. What would you do about that?
Well, several things. First, we should always teach morality in society. And government, schools, we should teach the classics. We need to make sure that people understand that there is good and evil in the world, and that there are good and bad decisions to be made, and I think we should always teach that. We need to make sure that the school system that we have school choice. Because when you start allowing more school choice, then you start giving kids the opportunity, whether it's homeschooling, charter schools, private schools. We need to make sure that the money follows the child, so the child can use it for whatever educational system they want to use. But you also need to make sure that we need to have a conversation in society about our culture and what's happening in our culture. You look at the young men that are going out and shooting in schools and things like that. Every one of them is a damaged child who has not had a male role model in their life that has been helpful to them. I know about this. I come from a single parent home. And I will talk about this openly all the time. My mother knew that there wasn't a father in the home, and she chose good male role models for me in my life. She actually put me in my first 4 years of school. I went to a military school because she wanted me to have discipline taught. She knew that it was a father who was going to teach discipline, and we're too afraid to talk about fathers and mothers having different roles. The reality is that they're both necessary in a home, and they both have different responsibilities, and we need to be okay talking about that. And a male teaches certain things to a son and a daughter that a female does not teach. There's nothing wrong with that. But we need to make sure that society understands that we need to have these young men, especially the ones that are causing these problems, that they have good male role models. And we need to go, as a society, we need to have these discussions. So schools are the great place where we can have some of these discussions, but at the same time, you need to have families have the choice of taking their kids where they feel that the things that they want to teach their kids, that they're being taught.
Do you feel gun reform should be in place?
No. Let's do two more questions. Go ahead.
Follow up to schools, so a slightly different topic. What's your stand with teachers being given the opportunity with the proper training to carry?
I am very much in favor of it.
Awesome.
I think teachers, right now, you guys passed a law, I believe, this year that allowed
police officers, yeah.
Peace officers,
yeah,
that's your bill, right? So it's peace officers and...
It's retired police officers with the 218.
Was it military or just peace officers?
Just peace officers.
Okay,
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Yeah, retired law enforcement officers.
Retired law enforcement. So that's a great bill, but we also need to allow people with proper training to go into the schools, and especially teachers. And I get a lot of teachers who tell me, well, I don't want to carry a gun. I say, well, if you don't want to carry one, I don't want you to carry one either.
Right.
I want the people who want to carry the gun, who have training, who, many of them are hunters, They're enthusiasts, they understand how to carry themselves and how to carry guns. We want to have those people, and many of our teachers would be willing to do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and let's give somebody else. Anybody else who hasn't asked a question? Yes, sir.
Going back to your education, and you were talking about money following the child.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, I'm not seeing, for example, homeschoolers, we have a huge homeschooling population up here in North Idaho in this district. So,
which is good.
Yeah, which is great, and
Yeah.
they're very successful. We don't get anything, and in fact, from the state, not saying that we want it, but what's not, what I consider equity is that we're paying in our property taxes and in our income taxes to the general fund to fund everybody else's education, while we're getting nothing to help support us educating our children. So.
But there should be, and there are resources available online and other areas where it's coming from the state, but there should be resources available to the homeschooling community. But the most important thing for me with the homeschooling community is that the state should not be interfering with what the homeschooling community wants to do. We had our neighbors for 12 years, their children were all homeschoolers. They were some of the brightest kids that I ever met. I don't think I would have the patience to homeschool my kids, but I'm really grateful that some people do and that they're willing to teach their kids. As you know, they're high performers, they do very well, and we need to do everything we can as a state to encourage homeschooling. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
Of everybody, so swing in.
Here, let me stand back there.
Yeah, then let me come out there and get you in the picture.
There you go. So squeeze in. That's us. Come on. Actually, I think you all fit. Okay, ready? 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. I'm gonna take a couple.
Okay.
Okay. I got most of you. Thank you for coming to Oh, hey you guys, before you leave.
Attention!